episode 69 of Grace and Steel. I'm Kevin Steele.
And I'm Kevin Michael Grace.
This show will be addressing the question, why is today's pop music so bad? The Trump train is moving so fast it's hard to keep track of what's happening. And so your hosts, pleased with the way the world is working for the moment, have decided that it's time to turn away from politics and turn our laser gaze on popular music. Full disclosure, the hosts of this show are old. Really old. Boomers, in fact. So it goes without saying, we know everything. Still, we say things like, hey, you kids, get off my lawn. And ask questions like, what's the deal with kids today? For example, they sure seem to listen to a lot of old music. A lot more than our generation did. Perhaps that's because there's so much of it available, often for free. But a more important reason might be that young people don't have a particularly high opinion of the product extruded by the music industry. Kevin, why do the kids like the moldy oldies so much? Or are we, as Annie Edison would say, just pandering to our demographics' well-documented historical vanity?
And when the commies gave the polio to Doris Day, Santa helped the Beatles chase McCarthy away.
Double reference to Community. All right.
Yes, and we did give the world fake butter and AIDS and Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to make any special claim for our increasingly intolerable generation. You know, I noticed this a few years ago, that whenever you see men working, they have a boombox or some such thing. And it always seems to be playing Creedence Clearwater Revival, or Led Zepp, or AC/DC, or of music from that time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the conclusions that I came to is that around the year 2000, the record industry decided that it was no longer going to appeal to men. That it was going to appeal exclusively to children, women, gays, and blacks, I think because they believe these groups to be more easily manipulated.
Okay, or maybe they had the white men all sewed up with their Creedence already, so if they just keep buying Creedence, why produce anything else for them?
Well, you know, you buy that Chronicles collection, and that's the Creedence that you need, right?
Yeah. No, I agree with some of what you say, at least in your observations, because I know that I've had younger friends, you know, like a generation younger, and I've been, you know, invited to their backyard barbecues and things like that. And it's all oldies. It goes from about 1965 up to 1995, and then it ends in somewhere around Nirvana. That's about it. So, I mean, I agree with that observation. Why they decided, if they did decide to suddenly pander to these, as you say, easily manipulated demographics, I'm not sure. I mean, they were marketing pretty heavy to those demographics beforehand. Maybe.
Well, I'll just say that around 2000 is when you see the rise of American Idol and similar shows, where they're not really selling music. They're selling narratives. And it's always some kid who's just determined to be a success because his mother, who is a cancer survivor, is, you know, it would mean so much to her. That sort of thing.
Yeah, there's that stuff. And
you see around 2000 the rise of the boy bands.
Well, that wasn't the rise of the boy bands. I think that in our previous discussions, we decided that was the peak of the boy bands.
No, that's when their records started, or their CDs started selling over 1 million copies in the first week of release.
In previous discussions on this topic, which we have had a lot of, by the way, audience, not recorded, of course, we picked the peak at, whose was it? It wasn't NSYNC, was it? It was
I believe it was NSYNC.
It was NSYNC the week that they came up with their album. I can't remember the name.
No One Does.
Okay, No One Does. That's the name of the album. But it sold like 1 million copies, like straight out of the
1.2 million copies in the first week, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So
now one of the reasons for this is that the music industry discovered belatedly just how much money preteens have.
Hmm.
And preteeners are ignorant and stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And so you find 5 young men who are carefully selected to appeal to all conceivable demographics.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the conventionally handsome one, and you've got the minority one, and you've got the athletic one, and you have the shy one or the secretly gay one.
I don't know whether they market them as that, yes, but...
No, it's only later that we discover
that.
We discover this. So there was this man called Lou Pearlman who died recently. Who was
a band member? You mean? Sorry.
No, Lou Pearlman was the fellow who put these bands together.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
And he later went to prison, not for boy bands, which what he should have been sent to prison for. He was a pedophile.
Oh, I see.
And
So he had a dual interest.
Yes, he very much had a dual interest, and I believe it was In Sync. After they had been the biggest band in the universe for several years, and had made, oh God, I don't know, $1 billion for their various owners, it was revealed that their profit, the 5 young men, including Justin Timberlake, their profit for their labor was $250,000 split 5 ways.
Which is, if you do the math, not much. $50,000 a piece. But they got to ride on a lot of planes?
Yeah, well, one of their concerts alone would have brought in more than $50,000 for each of them.
Can't say that they got a lot of tang because they
you
would have
saw
been
this
in prison
phenomenon in the 1950s after Elvis went into the army, that rock and roll was in the shade, and you had the rise of the bobbies, all of these clean-cut young men, most of whom were Italian.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And the music industry was dominated by pederasts at that time.
Yeah, I heard something like that. And of course, England had its managers that were, shall we say, light in the loafers as well. They're
yeah, they all seem to be.
Yeah, all the band managers all seem to have that predilection.
Yes, and in the United States, they were either light in the loafers or they were made men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or that they were, let's say, mafia associates.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
But, no, when you create something with all of this hype behind it, all of this planning behind it, like Britney Spears, it's not generally known that there was a huge marketing campaign by her record company before her first album was released. So that is to say that its enormous success was not exactly organic.
A lot of groundwork was done prior to the release of the thing, you mean? Or even probably announced that she was going to actually release an album.
Well, no, I mean, this idea that she's the sexy Catholic schoolgirl.
Right, okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, that has very little to do with music. And you see this becoming dominant. That why is Katy Perry so popular? Great figure, nice to look at, but the music seems to be rather an afterthought.
Yes and no. I know you want to introduce this a little later, but they do have 8 producers working on this. Each of these tracks, they're each contributing a hook. The music seems pretty integral. It's just done by committee, and it seems to be done by formula as well, with each of them contributing hooks, so that a popular song no longer has 1 or 2 good hooks. It now has to have 7 or 8, so.
And every song on the album has to be a single. It has to be a hit. Mm-hmm. But we'll talk about that a little more later.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things I want to throw in here because they follow on the year 2000 fairly quickly, and I know they have to be addressed because there are people out there yelling at their computers right now that are listening to this going, what about the download revolution? What about Napster? I remember Napster. We started stealing all this stuff. We no longer had to pay for anything. Didn't that wreck the music industry right then?
Well, Bob Lefsetz, the music writer, the lawyer and music writer, he's always going on about how the reason why music sales cratered is because people got sick of spending, $20 for a disc with one good song on it. I don't think that's correct. I mean, people didn't, back in the 60s, you put out a record and album sales were dwarfed by single sales in the early 60s. And you put your hit single or your 2 hit singles on the record, and the rest of it was filler, which was knocked out in a day. And there would even be, a Spanish or French or German language version of one of your hits. But since the Beatles, and everyone followed the Beatles, the idea was that the album was supposed to be, if not a Liederzyklus, a song cycle, it was, a snapshot of the artist, as it were, at that moment.
Say the word.
What's that?
Concept.
No, that's a little different. That's a little different. But no, there was a lot of time and energy and talent put into albums. Now, if we look at Napster, what we see is that people were downloading songs. And you could constitute an album from the songs that you could get, but that would be a pretty time-consuming process. Now, later, after Napster was shut down, with the rise of sites like the Pirate Bay, people were downloading not just albums, but entire discographies.
Yeah, I actually downloaded albums off of Napster. Some people were making them available. They just had, all the songs listed right there, and you just sucked them down one by one.
Now, research has shown that there aren't very many people, relatively speaking, who actually know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And after the record industry, the RIAA decided to sue people who were downloading music, or more often their parents. A lot of people were afraid that it'd be like that joke on the IT Crowd, where the little girl decides to download something and 2 FBI agents burst into a room and shoot her in the back of the head.
Right. Good times.
Yeah, but it's... The problem the music industry has now is that, for the most part, people wouldn't download it even for free.
Well, that was going to lead to my other point. I was going to say, following the 2000 was the Napster or download revolution. The other thing, of course, is the Loudness Wars, and that's a little more vague. Just a quick explanation of that is compression allows you to boost a song so that it has a very high level throughout the song. There's no dynamics, quiet, loud parts. It's all very loud, and it seemed for a while there that the whole goal was to boost songs as loud as you could possibly make them, and hence they were called the Loudness Wars. It got ridiculous, and it's very exhausting to listen to songs that are mixed to a very high average volume level. Anyway,
and old records, including one of my favorites from 1973, Iggy Pop's Raw Power. I won't go into the story of why this was necessary, just to say that for some reason the album was recorded on 3 tracks only. David Bowie did a mix of the album, which everyone said sounded cruddy, but the fear is that when it was remixed, it would be worse, and it was. And Iggy Pop did his own remix, and according to Wikipedia, this new version is arguably the loudest album ever, reaching RMS of -4 decibels, rare even by today's standards. One of the problems you get with this Loudness War is that the CD is not like an album. What you get with you don't get the distortion, you get clipping.
Mm-hmm.
The sound just cuts off above a certain level.
Well, it doesn't go silent, but you lose a lot of the frequencies. Yeah, that's out of the various instruments and voices. That is the problem. I mean, some compression is nice because it, what it does is it boosts the quiet parts and it clips the louder parts. You need a little bit of that in just about everything you do. But I think the old records were mixed to something like maximum -12, something like that, between -16 and -12. And then the Loudness Wars pushed them up to -8, sometimes as as loud as -4 average volume. So
there's a well-known electroacoustical, how would you say, principle that louder sounds better. But the record industry was playing us for fools because, as many people have pointed out, just turn the music up if you want it louder. But apparently that would be too difficult to expect people to do. And this idea that, this song isn't popping, that every song has to pop, so we're just going to compress it to death, such that this Red Hot Chili Peppers album was generally regarded as unlistenable.
Yeah, so here we go. We're getting more technology introduced that allows you to do greater things. With digital technology, you can do a lot more manipulation of the sound. And what's the first thing we do with it? We make it worse. Okay.
Well, there's another question here, which has to do with the sampling that's involved in digital music. And the early sampling that was used was not very good. People complained that the CDs sounded worse. They sounded thinner. They sounded glassy. That was a word that was used a lot, glassy, compared to the vinyl. And it was true for a lot of the early CDs and for the when older music was digitized. That problem has largely been solved now. But this idea, it's just really offensive when you think of it, that the record industry determined, and these guys, these famous masterers, they were begging the record companies not to do this, saying, you see all those Grammys on my shelf? I have all those Grammys on my shelf because I'm known for making this sound the best it can. And what you're telling me is just there's not enough compression. Needs more compression.
Okay, quick techie explanation here again. Okay, there are these guys that 4 years in the record industry, since I think going back, well, I don't even know how long, at least to the 50s when they started developing things like compression and EQ. These guys, they do the mastering, the final mix of the two tracks. They balance it out and they put on, they do 3 effects. They use compression, they use EQ, and then they use another compressor, which is a limiter, hard limiter at the end. Those are basically the 3 that you use in that order. And these guys that used to do this, they were said to have golden ears. They were the masters. They were the guys that knew, just by practice and some talent and some intuition, could make something sound, take it up just that notch from mundane to beautiful in the turn of a knob. Anyways, pray continue. They seem to have lost the argument. That's the thing. So.
Well, the Loudness Wars have ended. Even the music industry discovered that this wasn't working. But I mean, the music, as I say, the RIAA, I have a lot of trouble with that acronym, deciding to go after single mothers, and getting judgments of hundreds of thousands of dollars against them. This turned the music industry into an enemy. There were a lot of people who decided, and I was one of them at the time, that these people are bastards. They're terrible, terrible people. I mean, my own view is that in the final days of Napster, they had, Sean Parker had sought to get the record companies into it. The idea being that people would pay a fixed amount every month and they'd, be able to download this music. And Bertelsmann, which is the German company which now owns Columbia and RCA, they signed on, but the others wouldn't. But I really think that downloading music is not a particularly good excuse for the death of the record industry, simply because, as I say, most people don't know how to do it and are afraid to do it.
Yeah, but you called, those guys bastards. You recognized when this was happening that these guys were bastards. You, of course, have told me you started reading the musical press in the early 70s, the British musical press. So you probably know that a lot of the guys in the record industry were bastards for a long time. But the fact that they were bastards at that particular time, that is in the time of Napster, tells me that they weren't that particularly bright. In other words, yes, it's a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar industry, but the people running it don't seem to be that smart. And
no, they're not. They're not very smart, and I don't think they've ever been very smart. Most of the things that people think are good about popular music since the 50s came about by accident, and the record industry was shocked by this. Columbia Records didn't have any rock artists until Woodstock. And they signed up all these people. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, Monterey. Monterey was the big thing.
Oh, okay.
That was in 1967. And then they, at Woodstock, they went nuts. And this led to this infamous ad by CBS and Rolling Stone magazine with a list of their artists and with the heading, "The Man Can't Bust Our Music." Wait a minute, you're Columbia Records. I thought you were the man.
Well,
no, rock and roll shocked the record industry. Mm-hmm. The British invasion shocked the record industry. Garage bands shocked the record industry. Punk and new wave shocked the record industry. Grunge shocked the record industry. Grunge seems to have been the last surprise that we had in the record industry, and that was over 20 years ago.
So they said, no more surprises. We're tired of this. We're going to work this out to a formula, and it involves getting one Swedish producer per song. Okay.
Well, I blame this on Clive Davis.
You will be tested on this later, kids.
Yes. He had been the head of Columbia Records. He was ousted from that for corruption. And then he later took over Arista. And he made this album with the antediluvian band Santana, which for a long time had been Carlos Santana, whoever he was playing with. There was a record that came out in 1999 called Supernatural. And the idea being that each track on the CD was going to be approached individually. So he and with all the special guests, singers, such like, and that the idea, as I say, that every track is a hit. Every track is a hit single. Mm-hmm. And this record was an enormous success. It sold 30 million copies. And the record industry saw this and they decided a couple of things. They decided that they had solved the music problem. That what you do is you do what Clive Davis did with Supernatural. And they decided if they did this, then every CD was going to go diamond, which means that it sells 10 million copies at least. And you saw this phenomenon. There were two Canadians heavily involved in this, Celine Dion and that woman from Ontario.
Oh, Shania Twain.
Shania Twain, who was married to the famous producer. That they had these diamond records. Well, we're going to make every record a diamond record. Now, the similar things have happened in the publishing industry and the movie industry. The idea is we only make blockbusters now. We're not interested in the little films. Now, of course, it's always possible that a little film or a little book could become a blockbuster, but not if you set out to make blockbusters from the beginning. I mean, the idea that, we're not interested in books that are going to sell fewer than, 500,000 copies. We're not interested in movies that are going to gross globally less than $1 billion. $1 billion.
Yeah, and of course the result of this is that you avoid the accidents that later become the history of music. That is the problem.
Now, I wanted to mention one other thing with the collapse of the music industry. And this has to do with the difference in physical presentation. Now, your album which older people will remember, and older people will actually use, as Annie Edison pointed out, they will use this word album, that it was an art object, that it was large, you could hold it in your hands, and famously a lot of people used it for the construction of marijuana cigarettes. But it was an art object, and there was, large, handsome pictures of the band or some sort of artistic presentation on the front, and in the back, there would be the list of songs and all this information, about who was involved, and maybe the lyrics, which might be inside on on the sleeve, right?
Yeah.
Now, when they moved to CD, they moved to a very small format where, if you wondered why CD covers are universally bland now, it's for the reason that it has to be simple, because it's so small. No subtlety involved. So there was a loss there. The record industry was delivering art objects to people, and then it stopped doing that. Now, when they moved to digital music, that problem became more acute, because the physical presentation was done away with completely.
Well, no, they brought it back in collections, right? They brought it back in booklets and things like that. So they decided, okay, we're going to split the market here. We're going to, put a lot of effort into these collections and give them all the art objects they want. And the other things are just going to be a CD with a sleeve. That's it.
No, but wait, when you're ordering things from the iTunes store, you're getting a song.
Oh, I see. Into the, you're moved ahead. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, fair enough. That's true.
And it's,
you don't get a
you'll notice that the movie industry did not make the same mistake when they went to DVD and Blu-ray. You'll notice that the boxes for DVDs and Blu-rays are significantly bigger than they are for CDs. Now, obviously, this costs them money. They have to buy more plastic. But people feel an attachment to things that they do not feel the same attachment to virtual things. I've had occasions where I've lost hard drives. They're just gone. And I've had a lot of music on it. And I have to say that I didn't feel the loss all that greatly. In fact, I was rather surprised at how little I felt the loss. Because it wasn't, I can turn around in my chair here and I can look at my DVDs in their bookcases, 2 of them. And I think, I own you. You're mine. There you are. I can walk over there and pick one out and look at it. It's simply not the same.
All right.
With digital music. Now, what we're told is that this is a typical old man concern, that the kids aren't interested. They don't feel the same kind of attachment.
Well, of course,
but it doesn't seem to have occurred to the music industry that perhaps one of the reasons why they don't have the attachment is because they have abandoned the idea of presenting art objects. Now, to my amazement, the publishing industry has done the same thing with this push for ebooks. Now, people put books up on a shelf, and it makes them feel smart. It also makes them feel like they have to
move. So.
Yeah, that's correct. It makes them feel like they have an intellectual investment in the world. A bunch of files on a computer. You just don't get that kind of display.
Yeah, I think you can make too much of it. I take your point, but as far as it making the music cruddy from then till now, those construction workers out on the job site are listening to Led Zeppelin without the album cover. They're not dreaming of the album cover.
But they know what the album cover looks like.
Well, some of them do, some of them don't. The younger ones probably don't. They just know that this is kick-ass music, right? Oh, is that Zeppelin? Yeah, I've heard of Zepp. They don't own the albums. They maybe own the CDs. They don't have the nostalgia for that kind of stuff. That's all I'm saying.
No, I think that is part of the appeal. I really think that is part of the appeal. That, for instance, if you look at the first Led Zeppelin cover, which is a high contrast black and white photo of the Hindenburg disaster. I mean, that has the effect. Particularly with young men, they look at that and they think, wow.
I would disagree. But I mean, I don't have any data
if the cover is that good, imagine what the music must sound like.
There have been decent covers, as good covers on CDs now. I don't think that's the appeal at all, or the lack of it. I mean, I certainly understand the loss of it, and a small segment of the current audience, that is the young audience, has returned to the album, and they're collecting the old albums the way you and I might collect, I don't know, cylinders if we had a gramophone, I suppose. But, I don't think
cylinders? I thought you were going to say 78s.
No, I'm talking. Well, I went back farther than that.
Yeah, you went back a couple of centuries back.
No. Recorded music isn't that old. But anyways, the idea that these young people are hankering for that stuff, I don't think is there. I agree with your point that, that hasn't been cultivated in them, and it could be awakened in them, but I don't think it is. So I don't think that's part of the reason that it's gone shitty.
Going back to what I was saying about the music industry having eliminated chance, that if you see that movie, That Thing You Do, have you ever seen that? With Tom Hanks?
Yes, I have, yeah.
It's quite a good and quite an accurate depiction of the garage band world of the mid-'60s, although Tom Hanks, is not a pedophile or a thieving jerk in the movie, and the original manager is not a thieving jerk either. That they go into the studio and it's like, okay, we're going to knock out a bunch of tunes here selected by the record company. And what happens in the movie is that the artiste who writes the songs rebels against this, and the band breaks up. But what happened with the record industry in the 1960s was that these crazy kids with their artistic pretensions, oh my God, can you believe that they actually spent a whole month making this record? The problem was that these records turned out to be very popular. And so the music industry decided that, we're not going to argue with success. And along with this came the rise of the producer. And the producer was seen to be central to the success of the records.
The fifth Beatle,
you had this rise of these superstar producers. George Martin was the first. And then later you had people like Todd Rundgren. These guys know how to make the hits. They can corral the bands, and get the best out of them.
Well, Chet Atkins was something of a superstar producer prior to George Martin, but that's a quibble.
No, he was a superstar producer, but he was really running a factory there in Nashville.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they were churning out an enormous amount of stuff. But what we see arising from the 60s is artistic pretension becoming integral to popular music.
Phil Spector, sorry. Forgot to say
Phil Spector, of course.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Just popped into my head.
That artistic pretension. I mean, these kids, a lot of them turned out to be quite accomplished on their instruments. And a lot of them, I mean, what we saw in the 60s was the dethroning of the Brill Building of Tin Pan Alley. And people were expected to write their own songs. But there was a lot of intelligence involved in these bands writing their own songs. Not always. But so it's, it was complicated. And so it became more complicated and took more time and took more money, and I guess it got rather out of control by the late 1970s, where Fleetwood Mac put out this album called Tusk, which cost at that time the astonishing figure of $1 million to produce.
Most of it for Coke and pizza, but no, I mean they were trying to write in the studio. They went into the studio without ideas and tried to create in the studio, and they just had block bookings, and That's why,
Oh, yeah, they would block book a studio for months.
Yeah.
Which led to this rather delightful subsidiary industry where engineers at the studio would call their friends who were in no-name bands and say, the Rolling Stones, they're not around. So if you want to come in at midnight, you can have the studio for 8 hours.
Yeah, good times. But, they were kind of in the doldrums at that point. But there was that point, I should go a little earlier, when the rise of the punk movement, that became, I guess, known for upsetting the apple cart because, they were getting into this prog rock and it was getting more and more complicated. And the kids coming up didn't want to listen to that. They just wanted really loud, fast, short songs. And so the punks came up and upset the apple cart. The reason I bring this up is they've attached a lot of political history to the history of punk, most of it wrong. And that was noted in a recent article by this face-to-face guy, Akina Curie. I wanted to get to his thoughts here right away.
Well, I wanted to say first that the music industry, perhaps forever, the popular music industry, has been dominated by people who thought that the music industry would be great if it wasn't for musicians.
Yeah.
And to the extent that we can remove them from the decision-making process, the better our industry will be.
Well, we're there now.
No, well, you see this tremendous development in popular music. I'd like to point out that the Beatles' first single, Love Me Do, came out in 1962. A very simple song, musically and lyrically. 12 years later, you had Yes with their Tales from Topographic Oceans, which shipped platinum and was 4 suites, highly complicated musical suites. And the lyrics were based on, I think, Shastric texts. I mean, to the extent that anyone can understand whatever the hell John Anderson was singing about.
Okay.
But, I mean, if you look at, I think it was Kingsley Amis who said that jazz music went from Monteverdi to John Cage in the space of 40 years. And, pop music moved even faster than that. What you see with punk music is, my own experience was that I was a big fan of Yes and prog rock generally. And I went to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer, their brain salad surgery tour. And this was at the Pacific Coliseum, which is not the most salubrious venue for appreciating music. The Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver, which is a hockey stadium. And this was the tour where they had all these trucks rolling down the highway, all these 18-wheelers. They had quadraphonic sound installed.
Yeah, imagine how that works in an oval.
Yeah. And, and they had this business with Keith Emerson playing his piano upside down. Now, if you know anything about piano, you know that doesn't work. You can hit the keys, but no sound comes out. So this was faked. But I remember there's an extraordinary amount of marijuana use, such that, the last number, which was droning on for 12 minutes or whatever, I remember that I was looking around and most of the audience appears to have slipped into a coma. And at the end, they had this tone, which went from speaker to speaker to speaker to speaker. And it got louder and faster and louder and faster. And then there was this explosion. There were all these pan pots that went off. And I recall the audience was shaken out of its coma, and I heard wow, man, great concert. And it was around the time that Tales from Topographic Oceans came out, and I listened to it twice, maybe just once, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm not listening to this anymore. This has become preposterous. And then you see punk starting around 1975, And, punk was never a thing in the United States, actually. It was never popular. It got to be quite popular in Britain. But the nature of the British music industry is very different than the American one because it's a small country with a national press, such that it used to be the case that a band would play in a pub in London and the next day they'd be famous. Or Melody Maker or New Musical Express or Sounds would put a band on the cover that week and that band would be famous. It's never worked like that in the United States. The United States is too big and too diffuse.
All right, but what we are talking about is why is music so shitty today? And this whole, the idea of Akino Kuri, he had asked the question, can Trump make music great again? Because, there have been people talking about this being a reawakening of the rebellion. This is the resistance. And, they look to the punk movement, which was something of a resistance, but it wasn't to right-wing politics as most people try to pigeonhole it as. But, things are being shaken up. So are people going to say, okay, we're tired of what this music industry is serving us, and, we're going to go look for happy accidents now, and we're going to actually try to create our own happy accidents if you're not going to let them happen?
Well, Amanda Palmer, are you familiar with this creature?
Yeah, I looked her up after I saw the quote. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, punk's going to come back, and I guess she thinks she's going to ride its coattails. This woman is just a waste of space. In any decent society, she'd be starving in a gutter.
That's a quote.
But, what? Punk was over by the time that Thatcher became prime minister in 1979. It had fallen apart. Since 1979, punk has been largely a political movement, masquerading as a musical movement.
Right.
And, we're going to have all these angry young people and, bashing away on Telecasters again, and that's going to excite all of the people who don't like Trump. I don't see it happening for several reasons, one of which is, and I think this is integral to the question of why the music industry died, is because of the collapse of the bourgeois audience. The bourgeois audience wanted popular music that was more sophisticated than, say, how much is that doggy in the window?
A big hit in the early 50s.
Yes, a very big hit indeed. And Frank Sinatra famously left his record company to go to Capitol Records. He left Columbia to go to Capitol Records, well, for several reasons, one of which is he was fed up with Mitch Miller. Mitch Miller was the head A&R guy at Columbia Records, and he had very strong opinions about music, and he didn't have any time for artistes like Frank Sinatra. What you see with the records that Sinatra was making starting in about 1956 at Capitol are, in fact, song cycles. And this is sophisticated music for sophisticated people. Now, it got to be very popular. Interestingly enough, Mitch Miller's power at Columbia Records lasted well into the 1960s. That the only reason that Columbia signed Bob Dylan, famously, but the deal was that Dylan's records, his early records, cost so little to make that it was the idea that, come on, why is this crazy hick on our record label, right?
Yeah.
Well, John Hammond. I was just going to say that John Hammond, the legendary Columbia A&R guy, loved Bob Dylan from the beginning, and he was known for several years, Dylan, as Hammond's Folly at Columbia Records.
Yeah, so we know record companies can be so wrong. Yes.
You mentioned Akino Kuri. Now, he's the fellow who pointed out that these Star Wars movies, and you notice they just they announced the latest one about a week ago?
Right, yeah. They do it on the
something
heels.
to do with the last light stick man, something like that. And immediately everyone stopped talking about Rogue One. Actually, I think that people had stopped talking about Rogue One about 3 weeks after it came out, and they're all talking about this new movie. And Akino Kire pointed out that these Star Wars movies seem to be 2-hour-long trailers for the next movie. That is to say that consideration has become meta. And it's something you do. It's just a question of consumption. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think that Akino Kire is right, or Trump making music great again, is because the audience that existed, the bourgeois audience that wanted this sophistication and was willing to pay for it, has largely disappeared. It is considered, well, particularly on the right, to be ridiculous to invest art of any kind with any meaning. That is considered to be a sissified, faggy thing to do. And a great many people who would be interested have been scared off because the hipsters, the ironic hipsters who dominate our culture now.
Oh, you AV guys.
That if people make the wrong decisions, so if they say that I like this, well, they'll be given such a dose of snark by the hipsters that they'll never make that mistake again. It's a mug's game.
Stand up to the hipsters, folks. Yeah, but the thing about Akino Kuri's, he was riffing off of a Billboard article, right, that he linked to, right? And this Billboard article, did you click on that link? Did you see that?
No.
Link? Okay, the article is called "Where is Music Headed in 2017?" Here's a peek, and so second paragraph in it says, during a year that could and should bring new music by everyone from Bruce Springsteen, Tool, U2, and Kanye West to Drake, Beck, Lord, Brad Paisley, Nine Inch Nails, Arcade Fire, Mingos, Haim, Sam Hunt, Big Sean, Keisha, Little Big Town, and maybe even Katy Perry. It will probably take a left field surprise or a Taylor Swift album to match 2016's numbers. So that's the excitement that we got to look through there. Is any of that?
Well, I think this is record company hype. I mean, one of the things that, you look back at the 1960s and 1970s, that it was a commonplace for bands or solo acts to put out 2 albums a year. 2 albums a year. It seems incredible now. Now we typically have several years between releases. Now, the idea that these people are capable of no more than creating 50 minutes of music every 3 years? Well, I guess it better be pretty stupendous then, right? This is the marketing department's doing. The idea that how can we promote an album if you're going to be doing another one in 6 months' time? So we want to get our schedule straight a long time in advance so we can persuade everyone that this record is stupendous. It's like U2. Their latest album, well, apparently they've delayed it or scrubbed it because of Donald Trump, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But if that's the story, this album was supposed to be brought out rather quickly because it was supposed to be mostly outtakes from their previous album. But no, it is because, each album that we put out is going to be some kind of cataclysmic statement, which I just think this is the wrong way to look at things. You put out records. Records used to be put out on the basis that if we're lucky, maybe people will still like it in 5 or 10 years. I mean, it wasn't, when you try to design records that way, it doesn't work because for any kind of art to be memorable, it must have qualities that transcend the day that it was released.
Now can we talk about the 8 producers? Because this is the moment to introduce this idea. This is one.
Well, I wanted to mention one other thing, and just a small technical thing here, which is that CDs can hold up to 80 minutes of music, And when bands and acts realized this, they started larding up their records with longer songs and with a whole bunch more songs, so that the record, an LP used to run between 30 and 40 minutes typically. It couldn't be longer than that because you have this problem of groove cramming. But the problem doesn't exist with CDs, and so you get the 50, 60, 70-minute CD, and a whole bunch of these songs, were frankly not good enough to be on it. And I think that there was that these CDs wearied people.
Okay, so they still do that because they all sound the same every song. Now we're going to talk about the 8 producers, and I'm just going to simply introduce this idea that the reason we're actually talking about it at this topic at this particular time is because the other day, Grace and I were talking on the phone about music, and we actually got into the topic of country music, and he decided to look up a few contemporary albums because we were talking about a few of the country singers that are popular today, and you noticed that these albums, each of the songs had a similar thing to the pop albums, which was they had multiple producers on each song.
I just, if you look at the Santana album, which is the template, according to Wikipedia, the producers of Supernatural are Clive Davis, Jerry Wonder Duplessis, the Dust Brothers, who famously worked with the Beastie Boys and Beck, Alex Gonzalez, Charles Gooden, Lauryn Hill, Art Hodge, Wycliffe John, or however it's pronounced, Fair Olvera, Casey Porter, Dante Ross, Matt Serletic, and Stephen Harris.
Okay.
That is an awful lot of producers, and it's important for 2 reasons. One, this has to be very expensive, bringing all these people in. And 2, it's impossible to get it to craft any kind of unified statement when you have all of these different producers. And the country artist we were talking about is Keith Urban, who is Nicole Kidman's husband. And he has a song called, on his record, Fuse, which came out in 2013. And he has a song on it called Shame. And it is written by, it is 3 minutes and 3 seconds long. And it is written by Mikkel Storlien Eriksson, Tor Erik Hermansen, Benjamin Levine, Anmar Malik, Dan Emilio, Ross Golan, and Justin Parker, and it is produced by Keith Urban, Stargate, and Benny Blanco.
All right,
now, this doesn't mention, and left unmentioned here, is the fact that typically these songs on the albums now not only have a different writing and producing crew for each track, they have separate mixers for each track. Now, the importance of mixing became crucial with Nirvana's album, Nevermind, because the Geffen Record Company decided that Butch Vig's production it didn't pop enough. So they brought this guy in, Andy Wallace, to mix it. And, of course, Nevermind revolutionized the record industry, and that the record industry decided we need Andy Wallace or someone like Andy Wallace to mix the records. Well, we can't trust the producer to mix the records. We have to bring in another set of ears. So there is typically a cast of hundreds involved in the creation of pop records now.
Yeah, country pop as well. Yeah, well,
pop,
country sounds like pop used to sound anyway. It now has a completely different sound and vibe to it than the old country.
This Fuse album that this Keith Urban song is on, it's 44 minutes and 35 seconds long, and the producers are Benny Blanco, Nathan Chapman, Ross Copperman, Zach Crowell, Mike Elizondo, Dan Huff, Jay Joyce, Stargate, Keith Urban, and Butch Walker. And it has this...
That's the album producers is what they're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
It has this dreadful, bland cover where he's in a field at night, which is red for some reason. And this is obviously some Photoshop, creation. I mean, it really looks like the kind of cover that the cheapo labels used to put out, because they didn't want to do something like hire have an art director or bring a photographer in to set up an actual shoot. But this blandness,
it's ironic, maybe.
Well, it's like movie posters now. Movie posters are bland and horrible for the same reason. Well, movie posters are big and CD covers are small, but the idea, I guess you're not supposed to offend anyone.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to look at a poster and go, what? What's that about? I don't know what it's about. Are there explosions in it? Because I like explosions.
Okay.
The idea is you're supposed to look at it and think, okay, I know exactly what this is about.
Okay. Now, we've introduced the big problem, which is the fact that they cannot produce an album with any kind of unified sound. Each track must be a hit. Each track must have multiple producers and writers. So what do we just say? Pare it back? Go back to the old ways?
Well, no, there's another consideration, which is exceedingly important. A song can be about anything. And I'm revealing my age here again, but a song like the
He's over 60. Sorry.
Yeah, over 60. That song by the Rolling Stones called Dandelion.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of remarkable that this song was a hit. It's a children's rhyme, essentially. But as I say, a song can be about anything, and what you used to see in popular music were songs about lots of different subjects. I mean, Wire had a song about an insect, right?
Yeah.
Outdoor Miner, a very catchy tune, by the way.
Well,
but now, if you look at
their outliers now, I mean, now.
Oh, sure, but if you you look at black music, you look at hip hop, the songs are all about my dick. And how the ladies love my dick, and how the ladies are all fighting over my dick, and my dick is bigger and more powerful than all you guys' dicks, right?
Yeah. Well, here,
and if you look
we're not showing our age because I want to point out that hip hop and rap has been around for about 40 years now, so it's not exactly cutting edge anymore.
Well, hip hop and rap music started as a rather serious consideration of conditions in the inner city. Grandmaster
right,
Flash,
Mm-hmm. Yes, 30, 40 years ago is what I'm saying.
So. You had Cypress Hill and the Sugar Hill Gang, apparently, and De La Soul, apparently, it could be fun, too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead, it's all about, Glocks. Glocks and big cars, and I have one and you don't, right?
Yeah.
And I like to mess people up, and I'm so great. Whereas the stuff that girls like, your Katy Perry and your Taylor Swift, it's when it's not about girls wrecking hotel rooms, it's just this really tiresome girl power stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's also part of wrecking hotel rooms. Yeah. That's done with the posse, isn't it? So
it's empowering.
Friends
apparently, wrecking hotel rooms is
it always
empowering.
has been in music, though. Wrecking hotel rooms. Goes back to Keith Moon.
Yeah, I just that's deplorable. I remember Alex Harvey, the Scottish musician, who became unaccountably a very big deal in Britain in the 1970s. He said that he was just sickened by this stuff, and he said that maybe these people who wreck hotel rooms should spare some consideration for the people who have to clean up after them.
Right, okay. Well, we're near the end of our show here, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes to fix pop music forever. Go.
2 minutes to fix pop music forever. No, I think that the record industry should become more modest in its goals. Let a 100 flowers bloom.
Okay.
This idea of searching for the blockbuster, actually constructing the blockbuster, is entirely destructive.
If it makes money, it isn't. They're in it to make money. So, If that's what makes money, that's what they'll keep
Yeah, well,
doing.
I wonder who's making money. I mean, I have this, it has been rumored for years that the hip-hop industry is money laundering.
Sure.
No joke, that's what it is, money laundering. When you look at the cast of hundreds involved in making a Keith Urban record, or any of these guys, Kanye West, that you wonder how it's possible for them to make any money off these records.
Yeah, but obviously they do, because it can't all be money laundering. I mean, maybe the hip-hop guys are, but I don't think they're doing that in Nashville. They got a machine down there. It's a well-oiled machine. It kicks out music. Granted, Keith Urban sings about nothing but, laddies having parties at spring break and stuff like that. Is he that guy? I think he's that guy.
Oh, they all, despite the fact that Keith Urban, who's 49 years old, he looks like some rent boy twink. Huh. But they all pretend that they have this, a great connection with the common man, which is entirely risible.
Yeah, because the common man is listening in his backyard to CCR. And Led Zeppelin.
I think that the music
Journey
industry,
listening to Journey.
Journey, that the music industry should become more modest, and they should let the men back in. And by men, I mean, masculine men. I'm fed up with these indie rock acts. If you look at these guys, they all look like they're apologizing for the sex, and they're all dressed. They all look like they're the remnants of a shattered army. Mm-hmm. They resemble Napoleon's troops, straggling home from Moscow.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Led Zeppelin is not one of my favorite bands, although they have, a lot of great numbers and were very good, the best at what they did. You look at these guys and you think they don't look to be ashamed of being men. Quite the contrary.
Yeah. Exactly. I think, except for of course, the spandex era that graded into, got kind of, shall we say, ambiguous sexually there for a while.
Oh, you mean the poodle bands?
Yeah.
Of the late 80s and early 90s?
That stuff, yeah. With the makeup and the earrings and hang on, this is just going a little too far, guys.
Yeah, well, you had, but I don't know. I mean, these guys were manly. I mean, you see the same thing with glam rock. That a lot of these glam rockers, like that band Sweet, for instance, Ballroom Blitz fame and other hits, that these guys looked like the record, they just decided to find 4 guys and they went to a construction site and these guys were, carrying hods and they just said, you, and you.
Yeah. Here's the song, Fox on the Run. Yeah.
Yeah, go. Or, Slade looked like that too. Yeah. I mean, they didn't, they were wearing makeup and, these ridiculous outfits. They didn't look much like women.
They look like some of the trannies nowadays, though. The low-effort ones, I guess.
No, but see, I'll just mention with the glam rock bands and the poodle rock bands. This idea of music being fun, this fun of Katy Perry's and the Taylor Swifts, it seems forced to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. That's where they are right now. Just like the whole girl power thing seems very forced as well.
But, I don't know whether music, it may be that this era, running from roughly, let's say, 1955 to 2000 or 2005, the cutoff, that may just be an anomaly in human history. Because the thing about music is anti-democratic. Essentially, unless you're making dance music, and, some, dance music has intellectual pretensions, the idea is sit down, shut up, and listen to me. Listen to me. And that does not compute in today's world because it's not interactive. What, this guy thinks he's so great that I should set aside 40 minutes to listen to him? I don't think so.
Well, your 2 minutes are up and you haven't fixed a thing. That's all.
No, I mean, this could just, be an elegy.
Yeah. Well, you did say that, we are, your words, I think, were that we're entering a new seriousness, a cultural seriousness, a new era that is more serious. And Trump is a signal of that. we talked about television and reality shows perhaps disappearing. And in fact, there was a headline on Drudge where they're starting to question the economics of reality shows just the other day, a couple of weeks after you predicted that. So, I mean, if we're entering a new seriousness now, why doesn't pop music sort of follow that
Well,
trend?
I don't know. Maybe there'll be a reaction from the people involved. Taylor Swift, she started out very different in her look and her music. She's a sensitive woman, apparently, of some intelligence. But it was put to her, or she picked up the idea that she could become much bigger, or what the audience wanted was her, carrying on about how we will never, ever, 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 ever get back together. Take that, men.
Right. Well, if she does a quiet, sensitive country album now, then I think that we can sense a change is in the wind.
Yeah, I just think that, it's important to remember.
Do you hear that, Ms. Swift?
Yeah. It's important to remember, if you look at these 60s and 70s records that people still think are, good or great, they didn't sell that much at the time. A record that went gold, that sold 500,000 copies, was considered to be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And to the record industry now, a record that sells 500,000 copies, they're not interested. Why would they be interested? And also the idea of, how about starting small and getting bigger? A band like REM is a perfect example of that. They were on the indie label IRS, and they put out these records that the critics liked.
Mm-hmm.
And they sold more with each record, and they became more and more popular. And then, they have a hit, and they bust out, and they're a very big deal, and then Warner Brothers pays something like $70 million to sign them to their label. But again, this would require, I suppose, the record industry to trust its instincts and to trust the audience. And again, this is very much against the tenor of the times. That all popular forms of art now are essentially smash and grab raids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That we are going to shove this down your throat. There is no resistance. You cannot possibly resist. You are going to be overwhelmed. And then, you consume it and you forget about it.
Got it. That part I can do. But we can't forget about this podcast where we have solved what is wrong with pop music. All it has to do is just get a little more modest, I say. And it may.
And man up.
Yeah, probably. Man up in a throaty way. We need the big bands back. That's what I say.
No, don't start off on that.
And the old bicycles.
Yeah, the old bicycles.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't think we solved it, but at least we've managed to get it off our chests here. We managed to do an entire program. Two boomers talked about music for an hour and never once said video killed the radio star. Okay.
Until just now.
Just now. There you go. See, I had to shove it in there. Okay, well, that is the end of episode 69 of Grace and Steel. Thank you for listening. I'm Kevin Steele.
And I'm Kevin Michael Grace.